Hi, ladies.
Hi, how are you
Hello. Yay. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming to our podcast, the On Her podcast. My name is Janet Fuqua. I'm the executive director for USCIA, the United States Coalition on African Immigrant Health, also known as USCIA. Began as the National African Immigrant Project, NAIP, in 2005, under the auspice of the U.S. Office Minority Health. USCIA was initially established to provide a platform for the national and regional conferences on African immigrant health. For years, we've taken on the fight to address and advance the overall health of the U.S. African immigrant community. We brought together under one roof lawmakers, policymakers, researchers, healthcare providers, and students to engage in fighting for our community's well-being. And now we have decided to bring you into the very needed conversation involving both our African immigrant communities and our African diaspora communities. Thus, the Unheard presented by USCIA was born. And now I will turn it over to your host, Anna Fuqua.
Hello, and welcome to the Unheard podcast presented to you by USCIA. I am your host, Anna Fuqua, and I attend Bowie State University, currently majoring in biology. It is important to me to play a role in bettering my community's health by sharing this information to you guys. Our title for this series is Lessons Learned and Lessons Forgotten, what we have learned from COVID and where we are now. This is the first of a 4-part podcast series in the impact of COVID in our communities of color and the response to our needs. As we all know, COVID has taken many lives all over the world. From the onset, the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately impacted our communities of color on people from some racial and ethnic groups in the U.S., including our Black, Latino, American Indian communities, and our marginalized immigrant communities as well. Our communities of color have had higher rates than whites in hospitalizations and deaths. And the pandemic has added to the systemic factors that minority communities have experienced in economic well-being, employment, housing, and access to the healthcare. Today, we are going to talk about the survivors of long COVID. We have a very special guest for you guys. Let's welcome Mary Moody, a public health professional. She is a long hauler, and she is going to share her experience with COVID and why it is important to get vaccinated. Despite hundreds of thousands of patients stating that they are still experiencing debilitating symptoms after COVID, doctors are struggling to understand the cause and meet the complex needs of patients with long-term symptoms. So, Mary, you consider yourself a long hauler. What is a long hauler?
Hi, my name is Mary, and I'm a long hauler, and thank you for having me. In March of 2020, I was diagnosed and admitted in the ICU unit for COVID-19. It was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had in my life. It is important to follow the CDC guidelines and all the recommendations of getting vaccinated. It can save your life.
What type of symptoms did you experience?
Are we talking about the acute symptoms or are we talking about the long haul symptoms?
We can start off with the acute. Give us examples of what you experienced acute.
The acute symptoms, the virus is so tricky. And that's one thing that I can't stress enough. The weird thing, when I became infected, I had blurry vision, shortness of breath, and I had a high fever. And I didn't even know that I had a dangerously high fever until I went to the hospital.
Wow.
The weird thing about all of it is usually when my asthma is acting up, I am coughing so much that I'm vomiting when I'm having an asthma exacerbation. With COVID, I had shortness of breath. So I didn't really think that I was really that sick because my symptoms did not present as someone who was really sick. And
That's
so
scary.
I didn't realize how sick I was until the ambulance came and got me, and they were putting in 2 IVs and driving very fast to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I realized how sick I really was. And it still did not register in my head how sick I really was until I was admitted to the floors and almost collapsed. And they called for the ICU team to come down. My symptoms after the fact have been so debilitating. Shortness of breath. I can't even walk very far. I get so overwhelmed with a lot of noise. Sometimes I'm forgetful. I can't hardly really put my thoughts together. Just a lot of pain, blurry vision. And all of this just makes me so anxious because it's so much of the unknown.
Yeah.
My asthma is even more worse. I'm so sensitive now for every little thing. If I get sick with my asthma, it has led now from one thing to another, which is very problematic. So there's days when I can barely get out of the bed and I can barely move.
That is terrible.
So it is definitely debilitating.
And if you wouldn't mind telling us any long-term symptoms that you experienced.
Well, these are the long-term symptoms that I am experiencing now. One minute you think, oh, I've turned the corner, and you get happy. And then the next minute, the next day, you can feel like a train wreck. And so no one really knows what this virus will do to your body. Even though we have vaccines available, there is still no guarantee that if you get infected, that you won't have these long-term effects from COVID.
True.
So sorry you are still going through this. But how has some of these symptoms affect your daily life and those around you?
Well, I think, with my family, I have not seen my family in over 2 years. I pretty much live a very isolated life because I can't take a lot of stimulation, and the thought of me getting reinfected again, like if I go out to the store, if I see people with no mask on, or if I go to work and people are not wearing their mask properly, it automatically triggers anxiety because I'm so afraid that I will get reinfected. And remembering how sick I was in ICU, where I actually had a nurse and a doctor sitting by my door, and not knowing if I was going to survive that, I don't want to ever go through that again. So I don't really go out much. I live a very sheltered life. I don't let people, come over and visit. I try to be as safe as I possibly can to not get reinfected with COVID.
Were the healthcare providers able to provide you the level of support you needed to get through what you were experiencing at that moment?
I think the important thing is that the healthcare providers that took care of me were amazing. I received very good care in the acute state, but the long-term symptoms, it was difficult in the beginning to get my needs met because, hey, COVID is new. So we don't know much about COVID. And to really think about it, there's so many things that the healthcare providers are dealing with. So for number one, for an example, that they could be dealing with patients who have language barriers or really don't understand what their needs are or how to advocate for their needs. In my case, because I have the brain fog and all of these other debilitating symptoms, I was not able to piece it all together right away because your body is going through so much when you are sick with COVID. It's like your brain cannot catch up with what's actually happening to your body because everything is foreign.
Yeah. Well, how are you feeling today?
Today, I'm feeling okay. I try to make sure that I take care of myself, do things that I really love. And so today is a pretty much good day for me.
That's very great. I'm glad you're doing well as of right now. In your experience as a long hauler, what do you think some of the barriers that affect families economically?
I think the main thing, some of the main key points that I wanted to talk about that affects families is if you have two people in a household or one person in a household, and that person gets really down sick with COVID and they don't have the appropriate job accommodations, this can create a serious hardship for people. Because then the person is unemployed, then they can't get their medicine, then that leads to anxiety, and that leads to depression. And so all of these things really affect the family if the person becomes so disabled that they cannot provide for their loved ones. So I think it's very critical for people to really get these job accommodations where they can, where it is reasonable to keep people employed, to keep the family together. If it's one loved one that becomes disabled, maybe the husband or the wife will be able to maintain, or if they both got sick, at least one of them, if they're working for a facility that has over 50 people, can get these, accommodations. So it can just make things easier for them, and it will not be such of a hardship. At least push come to shove, they can downsize. But if you leave them with no resources, they're not able to take care of themselves. And that just makes the situation worse.
Yeah, it does. Well, thank you so much. Did you have any final thoughts about the situation and what is going on?
I think there are many things that I think of when I think about long COVID. We have to give kudos to our providers who are out there on the front line every single day, risking their lives with this deadly virus. And so it's important for people to get vaccinated so you can keep yourself safe, keep people around you safe, your family members who may have underlying medical condition, your children, just to keep everyone safe around you and really take this virus seriously. I would advise for people to make sure that they ask their human resources department about their reasonable accommodation laws, learning the policies, and making your vote count. And I think this is really important to really have politicians hold employers accountable to make sure that these things are in place for everyone, but especially the people of color.
Yeah. Were you able to receive any support from your community, church, or family?
Yes, I received a lot of support from the people around me, especially friends. They went above and beyond to make sure that not only that I had the level of support from them, they did a lot of running errands for me, staying on top of, what's current with COVID, making sure that they're safe in order to keep me safe as they came into the homes. And I think that is so important for families to, step up to the plate and be there when someone is going through this, because the hardest thing is I received all of this support, but I still felt isolated and alone because they were not going through what I was going through. And so there's always a sense of, when people don't understand something, sometimes they misjudge things. And it's like, oh, well, you just had a bad case of flu, not really understanding the impact that COVID did to my body, but they were there. And even, neighbors and the people around me were so thoughtful and, making sure that, that I was okay. And, COVID can be very isolating if you're a long hauler, because you have to go to work, you have to try to keep yourself together while you're battling being sick and the misunderstanding of what's going on with you. And so you don't want to be a burden. So you don't talk about all of your symptoms and you talk about what's really happening to you, because there's not very many people that really understand unless you have the long-term effects of long COVID.
Yeah. Well, I love that you were able to get the support from your loved ones. Thank you so much Mary, for spending time with us today. We wish you and your family a full recovery from the challenges of COVID. And now I will turn the mic over to our executive director, Janet Afwakwa. Janet?
Yes, hi. This has been a beautiful story from you, Mary. I know prior to taping, you share with me some of the services that your even neighbors were giving you, how your neighbor would leave things out for you and go to the grocery store for you. So thank you for sharing your story and I also know you have background in public health. So how has it been for you, knowing that typically you're the one out there really providing these services, helping folks in the community, and now you're the one that needs that service? How has it been for you?
I think it has been hard, and I thought of other ways of an outlet. And so being able to share my story will help other people, and hopefully will get families involved and churches involved so they can spread the word of vaccination and to tell people that there is hope, and not to feel ashamed or embarrassed if you have to go get help. If you have to lean on someone, find a good friend that you can rely on and people around you so you can feel supported and not feel so isolated. So it has been a blessing in a sense that although COVID was bad, I'm able to share my story to be able to help people. If you need to go get mental health services, you do that so you can be the best version of yourself.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'd love to have you here talking about COVID, long haul COVID, and what it has done to your body. And we appreciate your encouragement for folks to continue to get still the best nation. We love that you're spending the time with us and sharing with us. I'd like to thank Anna, our host, for the great questions. And of course, Mary, thank you so much for coming. This concludes our first of 4 series. Please join us for next week's podcast on the healthcare system and its response to the needs of community of color. The third part will closely examine our community's religious and social organization working with our communities of color. The final week of the podcast will look at workplace protection and governmental responses and what is lacking in these communities of color. Thank you, Anna and Denise, once again, for the wonderful information for tonight. Our youth is our future, and Euskaya embraces its participation throughout this podcast.